Proceedings are resumed. Please be seated. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition continuing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, before we took the break, I was moving into concerns with community services. And I was pointing out, or making the point, Mr. Speaker, that I didn't think that enough was being done in this area in line with what I understand to be the government's plan to provide prosperity and empathy for our people. And when I delve into some of the detail in the budget document, Mr. Speaker, and looking at some of the line items, there are things that jump out at me as major concerns if we are to be serious about the assistance we're offering to those who are in need. Looking at the Sorry, Mr. Speaker, could you just give me an indication of how much time I have left so I can pace myself?
The member has 35 minutes left.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sorry, I meant to check that before I started. Looking at the administration of community assistance programs to divert youth at risk from progressive involvement with the juvenile justice system and to look after the well-being of children in their own homes. This item is being increased by 157,000 approximately. But I note that the number of social assistance assessments are increasing from 1,484 to 2,390. Now, this is a 60% increase in assessments, which, doing the math, could potentially be adding 2 human resources to that area. But in my mind, it doesn't seem like the resources are being allocated to fit with this 60% increase in assessments. And I take the 60% increase in assessments to mean that the demand for that service in that area has increased. And we're not just budgeting for a 60% increase for the sake of budgeting. This allocation also calls for the provision of adequately prepared shelters and properly trained shelter management staff, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I've talked about it in this honorable house before. Bordentown alone only has 3 shelters and none are rated above category 3. And I think the government would agree with me, Mr. Speaker, that the existing shelters are inadequate in terms of what they can be used for and the number of the capacity. I think next to the District of West Bay, Bordentown has the lowest shelter space available. And in recent times when we were keeping an eye on some very destructive hurricanes which were passing through our area, I began to worry because if there was a need to evacuate people to shelters, we really have nowhere in Bordentown that could accommodate the majority of those who would need to be evacuated from low-lying areas. Mr. Speaker, we do have the Church of God building, which is still unfinished. And I recall last Finance Committee getting a commitment from the former Minister Tibbetts that he would re-engage with them to see what can be done to complete that building, and it still isn't complete. I don't see anything in this budget that's earmarked for the completion of that building. But I have to again make the case, Mr. Speaker, that Bordentown needs shelter space. And that building is multipurpose. It is not just a church hall. It can be used as a community center. And later on, if time permits, I will talk about the value of these community centers with respect to our young people and the issues they face. So I can't really see, Mr. Speaker, how $157,000 is going to cut it, especially given the importance of this particular line item. Again, public education on social issues is being increased by $33,575. This line item is supposed to assist and support in enhancing public awareness of social issues. Supervision and support of children, another critical area, Mr. Speaker. This is intended to provide a safe place for abused and or neglected children, assist with the placement of children in foster homes, and paves the way for people being able to adopt children and so forth. And this is being increased by $443,248, which is a sizable amount. However, the anticipated increase in services in this area is 30%. And again, this highlights my concern for the young people in our communities who are depending on us. And it's not just the young people, but those in need, dire need in some cases. Community development services, again, is supposed to allow us to build community capacity and promote social inclusion and improve the well-being of vulnerable children. Again, an increase of $127,428, but the level of services is forecast to increase by 30%. Again, I think we're setting ourselves up for failure by not properly resourcing these very valued services. Children and Youth Services, Mr. Speaker, which covers children being placed in residential care by the courts, children placed by the courts on secure accommodation orders, children who have been remanded or committed by the courts on youth rehabilitation orders. And we're increasing this by $233,333. The number of at-risk youth in this country, Mr. Speaker, is increasing. And I've spent the time to talk to individuals who are employed in this area by the government. And they are concerned that we are not recognizing the significant needs in this area. General programs in children's services, Mr. Speaker, which includes provision of NCVO, children's service programs, is getting an increase of what looks like $820. Foster care for children, there's no increase in the budget, which remains at $225,000, but the number of children in foster care is increasing. Again, we're trying to do more with less. I applaud the government if they're able to achieve this. But given the significance of these services, Mr. Speaker, I am doubtful that we're going to make the positive impact and strides that we set out to accomplish. Community programs. This includes community programs, preparation of meals, and after-school activities. There's no increase. And we know the number of children who could be positively affected by improving the service. Again, rental accommodations for persons in need, provision of rental accommodations for persons in urgent need. There's no change in the allocation from the previous year. But the number of families that we're going to attempt to provide this service to is increasing from 266 to 400. I just worry that we will run out of funding to provide this service. Support for battered women and children. This is one of the areas I think of biggest concern. And it's also the biggest disappointment when you consider the number of children, cases being reported of child abuse, rape, neglect, assault. All of these are being perpetrated against our young people, Mr. Speaker. And the increase in this area is a whopping $3,412. Therapeutic services for young persons remains at $25,000 a year. This is supposed to assist young people who need to develop skills in behavior modification. I understand some of this may be provided by third parties. Hopefully there'll be some clarification on that, but $25,000 a year is concerning. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Youth Services, the Youth Services Unit, my apologies, is getting an increase of $24,777. But what concerns me the most about this particular unit is that they continue to be housed in the Bordentown Civic Center in the mold-infested section of the building. I don't understand why any government personnel are still using that structure for office space. And when we think about the important work that they're doing with our young people and what they're charged with, I understand they have a color printer in their office that can't be used because they can't afford toner. Mr. Speaker, this rather than me continue to simply point these things out, I want to bring some relevance and significance to this debate. And while I don't have the full report here with me, I did print out sections of the Yolanda Ford report that our Honorable Attorney General commissioned, and I believe he tabled in this Honorable House. And if you'll permit me, sir, I wish to just read some of the most relevant recommendations in this report.
Remember, I don't have a copy of that report. It is an old report, and I know I have read through some of it. I will allow you to. Honorable member, you may continue on reading from any particular page. Please state page.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The first page will be page 20, titled Recommendations, where she said, involvement in wholesome, group-based activities keep youth anchored in conventional thinking and practices, which are important protective factors against delinquency. Strategies must therefore be devised to get youth who display less than conformist attitudes and behaviors involved in positive organizations such as the Scouts, Cadets, Drama Society, the youth arm of service clubs, and other structured activities. Failing to do so leaves them to drift and form alliances with negative groups such as gangs, rather than exclude troublesome youth because they may tarnish the good name and reputation of the particular group, seek specifically to include them. Mr. Speaker, I understand that there are those who will say that, these functions are being performed by private groups. I understand that. There are many groups out there. But I think the government has a great deal of responsibility in this as well. On page 28, under recommendation 2.5, she says the implication from the above discussion is that churches have a great deal of work to do, perhaps specifically by reaching out to the most vulnerable people in their congregation. First, as a preventative measure, churches can play a more creative role by helping youth to forego pro-social relationships. Secondly, in terms of secondary prevention, the church can offer guidance and counseling to those who have already displayed delinquent and criminal behavior. To expound on the first suggestion, churches must design and develop a range of activities which would tend to keep youngsters interested and involved. It must always be remembered that a 14-year-old is not going to cease being an adolescent because he is a Christian. Churches must therefore devise strategies through which the two phenomena, adolescence and Christianity, can have a happy coexistence. For example, young people like sports. And again, going back to the lack of these sorts of activities in a lot of our communities, in Newlands, there's really no opportunity for young people to get involved in wholesome activities like sports because we don't have the community centers. We don't have the facilities. And if we want to make any meaningful improvement in the issues facing our young people, we really need to start investing in those areas, Mr. Speaker. On page 55, recommendation 3.31. First, it is imperative that a well-designed plan of remedial education is developed and firmly pursued in order to ensure that from an early age, low achievers are given the kind of special and dedicated attention they need and deserve. This recommendation is supported by the 2005 Cayman Islands Report on Education, which states that there must be a commitment in our schools to work with all students to improve their performance and to overcome obstacles to learning. Secondly, there needs to be a school program of technical and vocational education. This would most likely include, but not be limited to, the development of or utilization of a technical training institute to teach viable income-generating skills. We must allow non-academics to leave the school system with more than just a low self-esteem. Moreover, after the age of compulsory school attendance, it is often at the discretion of the student to explore avenues to continue his education or training. However, it is apparently at this transition stage that many ill-equipped and inadequately educated individuals often enter the wasteland of unemployment, out of school and out of work. They lack guidance and direction. This program should therefore be flexible enough to allow such persons, under some special arrangement, to remain in the system beyond the age of 16 in order to leave that institution with some proper certification in a vocational or technical field. Mr. Speaker, that applies to my arguments on technical and vocational training and education. Mr. Speaker. I'm just rifling through because I want to get to the most substantive arguments. On page 170, recommendation 5.39. First, a multifaceted strategy is needed to address the myriad issues discussed above. This approach must be divided into interventions that are preventative and those that are curative. Undoubtedly, negative family experiences have done a great deal of damage to the psyche of many of the individuals who we now fear as criminals. The interviews held with the inmates prove this. What is evident is that these hurting young men who have masked their pain over the years with tough exteriors need and have long needed appropriate intervention to address the negative effect of experiences that have left them psychologically scarred and criminally predisposed. Had there been a different approach during the school years, many issues might have been resolved at that stage by counselors. Clearly, they were not. These men are now in prison, usually not for the first time, and they are still hurting and still angry, factors which are most likely contributing to problematic behavior. Page 171, 5.41. Parents are the primary agents of crime prevention in any society. It is necessary to understand and embrace that concept. Once that is done, one would appreciate the critical importance of supporting parents and the institution for which they are responsible, the family. Parents are potentially the primary agents of crime prevention because they are the primary agents of socialization. The process through which patterns of behavior are first learned. The process through which patterns of behavior are first learned. It is also the process through which values, norms, and societal mores are passed from one generation to the other. If this process breaks down and the family becomes dysfunctional, then what would be transmitted are anti-values and anti-social as opposed to pro-social norms. And one could expect problematic behaviors to flow from that household. Everything, therefore, must be done to prevent this from occurring. But how, may one ask? The answer is through family support programs. Interventions which aim to strengthen families and improve the quality of child rearing which occurs in the home. The advantage is that such interventions always yield multiple preventative benefits, and in that regard can be viewed as highly cost-effective. Section 5.42, family support programming has to be multi-tiered. It must be designed and structured to cover the development span from infancy to adolescence, and programs must range from those that are general to those that are highly specialized, which are intended for parents and children under severe stress and where the family is in crisis. Programs may be categorized as follows, and she goes on to talk about universal services, neighborhood services, and family prevention. Mr. Speaker, I think I've read enough to make the point that I'm trying to make, which is if we want to improve the social condition for our people, we need to pay close attention to the threats to this social condition. I don't think that we are spending enough time focusing on that. We spend more time focusing on the economic development of this country and what we can do to improve the economics and the economy, but we're not looking at the underlying social issues that this country faces. And while this report is old, it is still relevant. And I think it's even more relevant. And what I would encourage the Honorable Attorney General to do is to refresh his efforts in this area and produce a new report, because it would be interesting to see where we are now. I know that he's made efforts, Mr. Speaker, to implement some of the recommendations. Recent as I think last term, when he brought the cautions legislation, that was one of the recommendations. But there are so many more, and there's so many areas that are untouched. And the end result, Mr. Speaker, is our young people. We're failing our young people. We can brag about all the economic development and success that we're doing, but if at the end of the day We have a society of young people who are feeling displaced, forgotten, as if they do not belong in our success story. We are going to pay a heavy price for it. We see it already. We're expanding the prison. We have too many of our young people who are threatened, who feel threatened, who are, because they do not feel like they belong in our society, Mr. Speaker, they are creating their own. They are gravitating towards gangs. They are pulling away from positive, wholesome activities to go out and rob and kill. If we do not put a stop to this, and I mean by investing in our young people, in our social programs, we are going to pay a heavy price. Support for battered women and children, Mr. Speaker. One of the biggest disappointments in this budget, it's being increased by $3,412. Mr. Speaker, I think this country and this government now needs to take a very radical and bold approach to dealing with all these issues. For too long, in the past, we denied the existence of gangs. We are afraid to tackle the issues, cheap labor. We seem afraid to take a strong stand against labor issues such as discrimination against Caymanians in the workplace. Education. We are way behind the curve in our education efforts. We are the jewel of the Caribbean. We brag about our financial services. We brag about tourism, Mr. Speaker, but we cannot brag about our educational institutions. People from all over the world should be coming here to learn from us. We have done so much with tourism and financial services. We should be the educators for the rest of the world. But we have never taken that approach to education that we should have. Mr. Speaker, I plan to bring a motion, and I'll be very brief. I won't go into the motion, but this motion is going to ask government, every single Caymanian who's on scholarship, offer them the opportunity to get a teaching qualification at the end of their degree. So when they return to this country, if they can't find employment elsewhere, they can teach. We need to make radical changes like that in this country. It's not my idea. It's been done before in other countries. But things like that, think out of the box. Think of creative ways to help our people. The school system now is begging for resources. If students coming back home with a degree had a teaching qualification, it goes without saying, they could be offered 2 years in the school system, whatever it takes, before they move on to their careers. But if you want to pay back this country for the opportunity given to you, teach our young people. Simple things like that we can do that won't break the bank, but it will help so many. The deterioration in our families, our family units, the issues faced by single mothers. I know so many single mothers, and I know that they made the choice to have the children. But we can't punish them for that now. The children are here. They're ours. Mr. Speaker, we need to own them and do what we can for them. 80% of our young people are not progressing beyond high school. And they're going out into a world, as the report I just read from stated, where in a few years they are lost. They can't progress. They're being bypassed. We're not teaching our young people the value of a good, solid education. And a lot of them don't want to hear it anymore. A lot of them are moved into this mentality, Mr. Speaker, of I want it now. We need to go back to our traditional values where it was, there was no shame in a hard day's work. But it's up to us to lead and take that responsibility on. Let's stop being the politicians who fix these problems by handing $25 to somebody and hoping that they'll go away. I know something we all help. We all have to do it because we feel bad for people. But it's unsustainable. As more and more of our people fall into poverty, the handouts are going to have to increase even more. And I'm not talking negative of anyone of you honorable members who do it. I do it from time to time. But it's unsustainable. Let's teach our people to help themselves. Mr. Speaker, the last thing I want to talk about was education. And I know that the honorable leader of the opposition has covered this topic extensively. And I don't think I even need my notes because I've spent so much time working with the opposition group, visiting the schools, discussing the issues with education. And I've seen the need. I've seen where education has to be our number one priority. We have so many talented young people. We have so many that need just a little more to get to that level that I'm talking about where they can help themselves. They don't need us. But the only way to get there is to make the investment in our human capital, our people. If we don't do that, nothing is going to change. We're going to keep giving concessions to developers. They're going to keep building. They're going to keep creating jobs that do not go to our people. I know efforts have been made. I applaud the Minister for Tourism for what he's done with the tourism training. I know there's nursing. I know there are pockets of technical and vocational, but we're not making it top priority in this country. We should be the jewel of the Caribbean when it comes to education. That is the only way what we're building here is going to be sustainable and it's going to last forever and it's going to benefit our people. We must become leaders in education, not just financial services and tourism. Investment in our people. So, Mr. Speaker, the leader of the opposition talked about this leveling system, which we find is not helpful to our young people, especially when they're moving into tertiary education and they're looking at being graded according to percentages. The leveling system, most parents are confused by it. Special education needs, I'm glad to see that there's something in the budget for that. I hope that it's enough because their special education needs in this country, Mr. Speaker, are widespread. Every school we visited had a concern about special education needs. Again, I talked about encouraging more Caymanians into teaching. We were at John Gray the other day, Mr. Speaker, and a young lady came up to me and she said, "Could you just promise me one thing?" And I said, "What's that?" She said, "Try to hire more Caymanian teachers." I said, "Well, why is that so important to you?" And she said, "Look, they identify with us. We trust that they're guiding us in the right way. They don't look down on us. They are Caymanians." And that's not to say that foreign teachers don't do the same thing. But this young lady gave me some experiences where she felt that she was not her teacher's top priority. She felt like her teacher's top priority was the salary and that her teacher didn't care if she learned or not. There can be no downside in trying to encourage more Caymanians into teaching, and that is why I support the Minister of Education's assertion that she wants to give her teachers a pay raise. They are the most important people in this country. Our children's futures are in their hands, Mr. Speaker. So I support it too. And I hope that we find the money in this budget to do it. Don't be afraid of the criticism. Don't be afraid to be bold. It's time for radical change. I know that the curriculum needs to be improved. Another recommendation I'm offering to the government, let's make information technology mandatory. It has to be. Every job in the future is going to require information technology, knowledge, experience, and skills. The jobs that we are training young people to do today, Mr. Speaker, do not exist. They don't exist yet. They're just being thought of. Technology is advancing so fast. If our young people are not prepared to take advantage of that, they're going to lose out. My background is in IT, and I know the value of information technology. Someone asked me the other day if when I leave politics, Mr. Speaker, if I would go back into technology, and I said no. It has advanced so far in the past 4 years that I would be playing catch up for the rest of my career. It is integral to the development of our students. We also had comments from students about wanting to learn more about civics, our government, and not to embarrass anyone, but when some of these schools that we visited, when you ask students, Mr. Speaker, which politicians, serving politicians they knew. Ask them who's the premier, who's the speaker, who's the deputy leader, who's the deputy premier. A lot of them didn't know. It's important that they know who their parents put in charge of looking after them. So civics, again, and when we start to, Mr. Speaker, when we start to talk about government and what government's real purpose is, you'd be amazed at the feedback and the interest that our young people have in politics. I always start off by telling them that everything they do in life, politics plays a role in that. If you're going fishing, there are conservation laws. If you're buying a car, there are laws, there are banking laws and everything else. Everything that they do, politics plays a role in. So they can't go through life ignoring politics and what we're doing. And I encourage them, we all encourage them to come here and observe us and see what we do. Understand what our jobs really are. We're legislators. We make the laws that they live by. That's an awesome responsibility. So, Mr. Speaker, the last area that I need to touch on, I'm glad to see that West Bay will be getting a primary school. But I have to make another plea. Please look at Bordentown. We're overcrowded. Both primary schools are overcrowded. We need the school hall at Bordentown Primary finished. Savannah is running out of space. The facilities need to be improved. And eventually we're going to need a third primary school in Bordentown. I'm making that plea on behalf of the entire district, not just Newlands. Our young people are our primary focus here. And that's why the opposition went on this mission, Mr. Speaker, not to embarrass anyone, not to make the government feel like they were not doing it. We wanted to show our students and our constituents that we're putting our money where our mouth is. Education is our top priority, and it will continue to be that. Technical and vocational, let's just get it done. It has been too long. We keep talking about it. I know there are pockets of programs out there, but let's go full-blown, full speed ahead, and give our young people a proper start in life. So, Mr. Speaker, I've come to the end of my contribution. I think I kept it within the 2 hours. And I really want to thank all honorable members for listening to me. And I think based on what I've seen, they were really listening. All members of the government were listening to what I had to say. And I hope that even when I was critical, it is taken as constructive criticism. I am not here just to beat down the government. I'm here in a very responsible role, and I take my job very seriously. So, as I said before, you don't have to like me, but I'm speaking on behalf of a constituency and a district. And that is the message that I want you to take with you when I'm finished here today. Forget about what Al Saku did politically. Forget about me leaving the party. Forget about who didn't win in Newlands. And think about my message here today. Our children. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Honorable member for Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I rise today to deliver my contributions to the 2018-2019 throne speech, policy statement, and budget address, in so doing, I have many people I wish to thank, Mr. Speaker, with, of course, your indulgence. First, Mr. Speaker, I give thanks to Almighty God for preserving me and the people of Prospect for electing me. I would bid a good afternoon to the good people of Prospect and the good people of these Cayman Islands whom are listening to my voice right now. It is my great honor today to join my colleagues in thanking Her Excellency the Governor for adding in history her final throne speech before this Assembly against the backdrop of my first as a newly elected member. Mr. Speaker, I applaud this government of which I am a part for setting its track early on to be guided by an adherence to core values and principles rather than petty differences, as demonstrated by the preparation of a budget and policy statement which truly reflects a wide participation of views and incorporates a diversified manifesto of undertakings made to the citizens of these Cayman Islands. I wish to also congratulate and applaud the Premier for a bold and deliberate presentation of this government's goals for the next 2 years of this new administration. Mr. Speaker, I also applaud the Minister of Finance for the presentation of his first budget address, yet again affirming his capability and leadership of this country's Ministry of Finance, a ministry built on sound fiscal principles that will deliver long-term financial stability, stable economic growth, and improve lives for all the citizens of these, our beloved Cayman Islands. Mr. Speaker, there were a number of notable firsts identified by the Premier in his presentation of the policy statement, but there is yet another equally important, but not yet broadly mentioned first, and that is represented in the composition of this new administration. And although briefly touched on by the member of Newlands, I wish to expand a bit further. Not only are we a coalition government, Mr. Speaker, we are a government which reflects the full spectrum of political views currently represented in these Cayman Islands, namely the People's Progressive Movement, the Cayman Democratic Party, and the Independents. I would humbly submit, Mr. Speaker, that this government is the definition of democracy in our modern times. Representation by the people and for the people can only be a positive thing. We come together as elected representatives of the people with different backgrounds, experiences, and viewpoints, each with an equal chair around a single table, working towards a common goal. That is the beauty of the art and science that is government. Mr. Speaker, turning to the issue to be addressed today, this coalition government of national unity has presented another ambitious budget, but one that I believe is wholly achievable. This government has demonstrated a track record for setting positive objectives in its various ministries, with each responsible minister working in tandem to ensure achievement of those objectives together, no one half being greater than the whole. Turning to a more personal aspect of my address, Mr. Speaker, whilst many difficult issues have been laid out, I wish to focus first on how these plans reflect commitments I have made to my constituents as contained in my manifesto, and secondly, on the plans that have been so ably laid out for the Ministry of Human Resources, Immigration, and Community Affairs, for which I have the privilege to serve as councillor, and a ministry also that is led by the Honourable Premier. I am fortunate indeed, Mr. Speaker, to find myself apprenticing under such capable leadership. Through you, Mr. Speaker, I would first like to address those people I serve, the people of Prospect. I am a man of my word, with the framework set forth in my manifesto serving as my guiding light since my foray into the political arena. And as reflected in the policy statement so ably delivered by the Honourable Premier, it is clear to see that many of my manifesto commitments have been embraced by this coalition government of national unity and put into action. And for that, on behalf of the people of Prospect, I am truly grateful. First, at the local level, Mr. Speaker, the one issue that was almost as pressing as the unemployment of our people is the alarming increase in crime, and in particular, burglary and petty theft, both to residential and marine properties. In my manifesto, I committed to an improved and enhanced neighborhood watch that would empower local residents to work alongside better equipped frontline police officers to watch over and protect our neighborhoods. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to say that this coalition government has embraced this approach with the development of what the Premier referred to as the community wardens, who will serve to increase visibility and responsiveness to threats within our communities, while also serving as a deterrent to those who would seek to harm Prospect or its people. Ensuring the success of this initiative, Mr. Speaker, the budget presently before the House creates funding for the recruitment of a further 75 community police officers over the next 3 years, which will work towards the further detection and deterrence of crime in our communities. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, funding has been allocated for the long-term prevention of crime by investing in at-risk youth programs which support rehabilitation of young offenders while also preventing homegrown crime through the intervention of positive initiatives in the lives of those young people who are considered at risk. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, my manifesto committed to revitalizing the local Prospect community, both in terms of beautification, but also enhancement of existing infrastructure, such as roadworks, which included improving safety. Mr. Speaker, working towards my commitments began with the resurfacing of Mangrove Avenue, one of the most neglected roads in all of Prospect. This work was made possible by the surplus achieved by the previous administration, and I am further grateful to the Minister and Ministry of Commerce, Planning, and Infrastructure and the government for their agreement to get to work so promptly. But, Mr. Speaker, their objectives align with mine: to work together to achieve solutions to issues in all of our districts as quickly and cohesively as possible. Additional work in Prospect will include roadworks and other neglected roadways, always with safety at the forefront of mind. This important factor will be addressed through the installation of speed bumps in residential areas and enhanced street lighting. One of the commitments which I made to myself upon taking office, Mr. Speaker, and I know this will strike very close to your own heart, is accountability for the District of Prospect, or constituency of Prospect, rather, sometimes at my own expense and sweat. And because I take that commitment very seriously, I have found myself on many occasions spending many days cutting grass and pruning trees with my own hands or by my own expense. Now, many, Mr. Speaker, would argue that perhaps I need the exercise, and perhaps I can't argue with them on that. But through that work in the soil of Prospect and through the glasses of lemonade which have been extended to me on breaks with the beating sun at my back, I realized how seriously I take the responsibility which I have to the constituency of Prospect and to the people who call it home. But, Mr. Speaker, grass and trees will always grow back. And as such, the work will never be done. For this reason, I consider my work in Prospect a living work, which constantly evolves, changes, and develops. Mr. Speaker, I will shortly be rolling out Project Prospect, a living work which I believe is bigger than any one person, but is the essence of community, a collective effort of making better the place we all call home. An important component of Project Prospect is the economic uplift which comes with ensuring the spirit of hard work and community is equally rewarded by available local work going to those small business owners who they themselves reside in Prospect and who will join me in Project Prospect to better the community they themselves live in and reaping the rewards of a job well done. Again, Mr. Speaker, rewarding hard work and economic outflows, all part of a formula which make a better community in Project Prospect. Mr. Speaker, my manifesto also committed to more public open space in terms of parks for the community benefit. In addition to the work already started to repurpose the derelict homes and properties within Prospect, work has already begun on delivering a large public park that will beautify both Red Bay and Prospect, proving once again the collaborative nature of this new coalition government and our willingness to work together. I will leave it to the Premier to outline those specific plans, Mr. Speaker, given that the vision for this exciting concept was in fact truly his, very much taking shape under the last administration. But, Mr. Speaker, for every small success, more challenges remain. One such is the decades-old issue of flooding in Prospect. The rains of the past week have resulted in major flooding throughout Prospect, highlighting the need for more drainage. The problem, Mr. Speaker, is that the water table in the area is so high, combined with the fact that much of Prospect represents reclaimed land that required significant fill to develop in certain areas, which serves to compound the problem of adequate drainage. Mr. Speaker, I fear our solution to the immediate issue at hand will be a costly one. However, I am confident that together with the experience and teamwork of my colleagues, we will develop a solution which both addresses the issue without imposing undue financial stress on our many other important and vital projects. Another area that still represents a threat, though not exclusively to Prospect, is the ever-present concerns regarding foreclosures. Mr. Speaker, I know it also strikes deep within your own heart when I say that I feel the weight of responsibility of the 1,200 individual lives in Prospect that I am responsible. And it burdens my heart, Mr. Speaker, when I find myself helpless to provide assistance to those who are about to lose their homes. Just this week, I sat with one of my constituents and witnessed firsthand what can only be described as reprehensible actions by a local bank who ignored an individual's active attempts to make good on their arrears despite distressed circumstances by opting instead to list and sell this property, displacing one of my constituents. Mr. Speaker, while the debt has been cleared for the bank, it marks just the beginning for the families that are left helpless and now homeless in its wake. And it creates a further dependence on the government to fill those gaps. Mr. Speaker, on this point, I have to agree with my learned colleague, the member from Bordentown West. More needs to be done by this government to protect Caymanians from foreclosures. We, the government, must actively negotiate with our local banks, who I might add, look to us for the same assistance and concessions as any other local business to afford flexibility and compassion to those Caymanians when they need it the most. Especially, Mr. Speaker, when what is held in the balance is the roof over the head of a Caymanian family. I believe it is incumbent on us as government to do this. Mr. Speaker, allow me to now turn to the one item that for me may prove to be the only item that more convincing may yet still be required. I am advised to get the difficult matters out of the way from early, and everything after that will be downhill. Well, I guess we shall see if that holds true today. Mr. Speaker, there was a time when my only job was to be critical. However, in my current role, I accept if I am to be critical, I also have the responsibility to propose an alternative solution. Mr. Speaker, I gave deep consideration in including thoughts on this other item, which I believe is worthy of consideration. However, Mr. Speaker, I felt it necessary to maintain my autonomy as an independent, though I believe equal member of this coalition government, to act independently in my address. As such, Mr. Speaker, let us begin with the difficult one, if not the expected one. And that is the government's plans as laid out by the Honorable Minister of Tourism regarding the Georgetown Cruise Berthing Facility. It is no secret, Mr. Speaker, I am still not sold on the idea of pursuing cruise berthing, at least in its present location. And my government knows this, and as such, I am taking no liberties here. However, I do understand the necessity for it, and even the timing when taken in consideration of the larger context, that being the overarching Georgetown Revitalization Project, which I agree, as a lifetime Georgetowner, this needs to happen. Then, Mr. Speaker, I gain a better understanding as to why the present location may arguably be the best option. However, Mr. Speaker, I would not be true to myself if I simply left it there. I also have my concerns, and those need to be ventilated. First, even with the development of cruise berthing piers in Hogstie Bay, which, by the way, will change the face of downtown Georgetown forever, it still will not allow for 365-day usage because it is not situated in a protected harbor. Also, Mr. Speaker, thus far, much of the conversation has focused on how the cost of the initial construction of berthing facilities could be met. But I would point out that not much discussion has been had on what impact the costs of maintaining this facility will be on an annual basis. We also haven't discussed the shelf life of this project. Like all buildings or infrastructure, Mr. Speaker, they are not designed to live forever, but have an expiration date. The shelf life on this building, that is the piers, I understand, is estimated in the region of 20 to 25 years. So at some point in the future, it too will face a major refurbishing at what can be expected to be a future extensive cost. In short, Mr. Speaker, I believe our focus in terms of cruise development is too narrow. But again, that is a critical aspect. What is the alternative? There exists an alternative, Mr. Speaker, that has recently been brought to my attention that provides infrastructure that, in my opinion, is forward-looking and one that plans for the next 100 years instead of the next 25 years. And one that touches on a much broader aspect of the Cayman economy than merely just cruise tourism. We have no doubt read about by now, Mr. Speaker, the Eastern Cargo Port option that has been offered up, which proposes creating a deep water protected harbor that could accommodate cargo vessels, as well as larger Oasis-class cruise ships, which cannot now be anchored in Georgetown or off spot stop. I believe, Mr. Speaker, this opportunity deserves a closer look. And I have no doubt when the questions have been appropriately answered that my coalition government will give it that closer look. However, I believe, Mr. Speaker, with a protected harbor, not only can we take advantage of cruise berthing, but we can also explore the option of creating home porting. This will mean cruise ships that service the Cayman Islands could use the Cayman Islands as a hub to access the wider Caribbean, as well as Central and South America. The economic uplift alone created from this opportunity warrants a further look. But it wouldn't end there, Mr. Speaker. Home porting would also increase our airlift capacity, and as such, we can expect a substantial increase to air arrivals and stayover visitors, and the infrastructure needed to support this industry. Further, Mr. Speaker, the increased imports that will be needed to service these vessels in terms of food stock would also introduce much needed new revenue to government coffers in the form of duties that will be collected from this cargo. Mr. Speaker, I will also admit that I wasn't sold on an idea first proposed under your tenure as this country's first premier, that being of mega yachting. However, that was before I was given the opportunity by this current administration to better appreciate the value of this important industry to the Cayman Islands by way of the Maritime Authority of the Cayman Islands. On a recent visit to Monaco, I was afforded the opportunity to see firsthand why the Cayman Islands are the global leaders in mega yacht registrations. The Red Ensign Group, a division of the Maritime Authority of the Cayman Islands, accounts for 80%, Mr. Speaker, of the global mega yacht industry. However, we in the Cayman Islands offer no amenities locally. For an industry, we currently rank #1 in the world. In addition to mega yachting, cruise berthing, to include home porting, there is also the potential for expanded cargo operations that may include transshipment, as well as the potential relocation of our fuel storage tanks, as well as the construction of a new highway connecting from Prospect to the Eastern Districts. The spin-off economic benefits to the local community for local truckers, engineers, and more so suggest to me anyway that further discussion is warranted, and I remain hopeful that it can be included on the government agenda going forward. Mr. Speaker, turning my attention now to the Ministry of Human Resources, Immigration, and Community Affairs for the upcoming 2 years, let me say that the learned minister, the Honorable Premier, has my full support. And I look forward to seeing the objectives he has set reach their full potential as his counselor. Mr. Speaker, the primary objective of this government is to achieve sustainable social and economic development. This will only be achieved through the development of sensible policies and legislation relating to law enforcement, border security, labor compliance, workforce development, employment of Caymanians, and identifying, addressing, and preventing social issues in our country. Through these policies, the ministry will contribute to national security, economic prosperity, and the well-being of the community through effective immigration controls, policing, delivering on workforce readiness programs, and enforcement of workplace safety and employment standards. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, through the subject area of community affairs, the ministry will endeavor to assist and empower persons in need and enhance the well-being of the vulnerable. Focus will be placed on enhancing operations and ensuring that services are delivered more effectively and efficiently. While this is no small task, Mr. Speaker, with the support of everyone, both the private and public sector, I believe the ministry can carry out this responsibility. Mr. Speaker, focusing first on the goals of the Ministry of Human Resources and Immigration, these goals include achieving full employment for all Caymanians through the creation of a Human Resources Department, which will better enable the government to improve planning the strategy and monitoring of the overall workforce of our country, including better management of the work permit regime. Mr. Speaker, the ministry recognizes the need for a more holistic and collaborative approach in addressing the issues surrounding unemployment as well as underemployment amongst our Caymanians. We are all aware that unemployment is a very emotive issue in the Cayman Islands and has a tendency to obscure the fact that causes of unemployment vary and may therefore require different policy responses. As such, the ministry's budget has been developed to facilitate a more holistic approach, ensuring that Caymanians are better prepared and protected to ensure that they are able to actively participate and engage in the economic opportunities that exist in the local labor market. Mr. Speaker, social investments in Caymanians are embedded in our strategies, as well as our policy decisions. And I can attest that human capital development is a priority for this government. We are cognizant that there are Caymanians who experience challenges in securing and retaining employment. These particular cases can be extremely complex and require a degree of both compassion and careful balance of additional training, and in some instances, instilling confidence in those citizens to be able to effectively help themselves. For this reason, a multi-agency approach is often considered the most effective approach to ensuring long-term results. Mr. Speaker, with a multi-agency approach, all service providers are committed to providing an optimal service to our clients to maximize their potential for change. As such, the ministry now has responsibility for key agencies which work to address the barriers to employment and have a unique opportunity to develop local labor capacity to meet current and future workforce requirements, and address the obstacles to employment faced by many Caymanians. Mr. Speaker, the ministries, agencies, and departments are interconnected and therefore have to capitalize on opportunities to achieve greater outcomes. The ministries' agencies, namely the National Workforce Development Agency, hereafter referred to as the NWDA, the Department of Children and Family Services, hereafter referred to as the DCFS, and the Needs Assessment Unit, hereafter referred to as the NAU, will address the needs of unemployment and the unemployed persons through a holistic and strategic approach. Through the collaborative efforts of these agencies, the ministry will have the capacity to engage unemployed Caymanians by better coordinating services such as childcare, counseling and family services, mental health support, and the provision of financial services. As the NAU and DCFS work to address the social barriers to unemployment, Mr. Speaker, the NWDA will also support the work readiness of Caymanians through skills assessments and development of a range of education, training, and development opportunities, thereby aligning Caymanians actively seeking employment with the needs of the employers. During this upcoming 2-year budget period, the NWDA has a range of training and development initiatives with the aim of enabling Caymanians to build skills and increase their opportunities to secure employment in the local workforce. Mr. Speaker, it cannot be overstated that the supply of labor is a key and challenging component in the pursuit of economic stability, prosperity, and progress for this country. Historically, the Cayman Islands labor market has been dependent on a level of migration. This dependency is evidenced by the island's diverse international and multicultural population, which helps to fuel the economic engine that is our labor market. And Mr. Speaker, this did not start yesterday. Expectedly, the unprecedented economic growth enjoyed by these islands has led to a significant increase in a number of work permit grants. The goal now, Mr. Speaker, is to ensure that we not only continue to sustain labor market expansion, but also leverage a dynamic mix of strategic incentives, workforce management solutions, and enforcement to improve immigration, labor, and employment services in order to create opportunities for Caymanians to more ably compete and advance within our world-class workforce. Mr. Speaker, one element of the government's approach, therefore, is to create meaningful recognition and rewards for those employers delivering a fair and equitable employment experience for Caymanians. In addition to managing a national jobs clearinghouse, Mr. Speaker, the new department will also manage an employer accreditation program, which will be geared toward holding business owners accountable and rewarding best practices, advancing opportunities for Caymanians in the workforce, and preventing employment-related abuse of all employees. The goal, therefore, Mr. Speaker, is to encourage fair and equitable treatment of all Caymanians as a key element of our top employers' corporate culture and business staffing plans. In reality, Mr. Speaker, we can appreciate that a wide range of factors exist which affect the balance of power within employment relationships. Such factors may therefore be expected to either increase or reduce the likelihood that Caymanian employees will be adversely treated in the workplace. As such, Mr. Speaker, we will not only implement programs and strategies to create workforce opportunities for Caymanians, but also ensure capacity and capability is available within the resources of the National Human Resources Department to strategically monitor, analyze, anticipate, and manage the labor needs of our country. Our vision is to support the process of building effective workforce capability among Caymanians in conjunction with delivering an efficient, fair, and transparent work permit and permanent residency regime that does not disenfranchise Caymanians in our pursuit of employment opportunities or career advancements. Mr. Speaker, as you would expect, the process of establishing the National Human Resources Department will involve an intense degree of change, the magnitude of which is captured more so in the desired strategic outcomes as opposed to the project deliverables. Those strategic outcomes include: 1, increased grant of employee rights, protections, and priorities for Caymanians in accordance with relevant laws. 2, reduction in the likelihood that Caymanian employees will be adversely treated in the workplace. 3, reduction in the likelihood that employers will exploit work permit holders in favor of employing and developing Caymanian employees. 4, provision of value-added services and benefits for employers that demonstrate specific practices aimed at ensuring fair and equitable treatment for Caymanian employees. 5, increased talent development opportunities for Caymanian employees, including scholarships, mentorships, apprenticeships, and continuing professional education. 6, increased visibility by the competent authorities into workplace practices and employers' compliance with statutory obligations. And 7, greater efficiencies in the business process related to immigration, labor, and workforce development services through modernization of technology, legislation, and corporate culture. We have recognized, Mr. Speaker, and indeed have accepted that the modernization of immigration, labor, and employment services will require multi-level transformation, beginning with the recruitment of an interim director to assume responsibility for the National Human Resources Department. The interim director will be responsible for managing the complex change process that will span legislation, policy, governance, business processes, technology, operational roles and responsibilities, talent management, and organizational culture. In his recent budget address, Mr. Speaker, the Premier clarified that the establishment of the National Human Resources Department will not merely be an exercise of merging functional aspects of the NWDA and the Department of Immigration. In essence, the establishment of this new department represents a paradigm shift. This paradigm shift, Mr. Speaker, will kick off with a change in organizational leadership, coupled with an aggressive plan that calls for the modernization of strategies, services, and business processes. Mr. Speaker, the sustained growth of Cayman's labor market and maturation of its key industries demands now more than ever that public service delivery models are customer-centric, responsive, efficient, and driven by leaders that utilize innovative strategies to meet our customers' priorities. For this reason, Mr. Speaker, the National Human Resource Department is being designed to leverage the benefits of integration between public sector agencies, as well as the efficiencies of automation, e-services, and information exchange solutions. The reality of the public sector today, Mr. Speaker, is that it is assessed by the efficiency of its service delivery. Gone are the days where the effectiveness of the public sector is measured solely by the revenue it generates or by the employment it creates. Driven largely by a generational shift, the jurisdiction's dominance as an offshore financial center and the financial service industry that comes with it, there is a wide-scale demand from the public sector for more effective, efficient, and convenient public services. These are expectations that transcend nationality, economic status, occupation, and the different methods of funding, managing, and delivering these services. Mr. Speaker, on this basis, I am confident that the National Human Resources Department will redefine immigration, labor, and employment services, strengthen customer focus, and build integrated service delivery models. Mr. Speaker, the public deserves for us to be at the center of every decision, from strategy formulation and design through to execution. This ambitious change program, therefore, will entail significant business process reengineering to implement improved value for money processes that will reduce waste and duplication whilst producing an effective customer journey. Mr. Speaker, history dictates that on its own, change in the policy and regulatory framework will not achieve the desired results intended for the National Human Resources Department. We are also keenly aware that there is growing risk that employees are not trained in the skills and supported in developing the fundamental competencies that they need in order to respond to changing circumstances. For this reason, Mr. Speaker, the new department is being designed with talent management in mind and with the realization that capacity building reforms must receive substantial attention in order to facilitate the empowerment of civil servants with the right mix of skills and tools. Mr. Speaker, our economic engine has and continues to create job opportunities in the hospitality and trades industries. Again, we must all continue to encourage our young and not so young Caymanians to take full advantage of the technical, vocational, and educational training and ready-to-work programs to develop and train themselves to proudly take on these meaningful and necessary careers. Mr. Speaker, as we look to the tangible future benefits from the funds in this appropriation, it is important for this honorable House to also pause and recognize some of our accomplishments. While we continue to provide resources to find meaningful and long-term employment opportunities for our Caymanians, we must also publicly recognize the employers who consistently employ and train our Caymanians. This is especially necessary for the small and micro business owners who take on interns and employ Caymanians in significant numbers, often training Caymanians at their own cost and on their own time. Mr. Speaker, we must also recognize the larger firms within private sector who build and maintain excellent training programs for young Caymanians and continually develop talented young Caymanians and progress them through their careers. Mr. Speaker, I'm also encouraged by our young Caymanians. I continue to be impressed by the Passport to Success cohorts. These young people have shown discipline, a spirit of teamwork and cooperation, a willingness to work hard and to continue to develop and advance their skills, knowledge, and experience. Expanded Passport to Success and Ready-to-Work programs will continue to prepare and develop our young Caymanian workforce for employment, offering a hand up, Mr. Speaker, not a handout. One concern that I have, though, is that our young men are underrepresented. They are not taking advantage of these programs, Mr. Speaker, as they could be, and are therefore outnumbered by their female counterparts by a significant margin. I therefore appeal to my male colleagues in these hallowed chambers, fathers, uncles, brothers, and other male role models in the community to make an effort, an extra effort, to encourage our young men to develop their full potential. Mr. Speaker, of equal importance are the goals associated with supporting our most vulnerable, to which work has already begun in terms of reorganizing the Needs Assessment Unit, which recently was the primary focus of the Public Accounts Committee. It was also encouraging, Mr. Speaker, to see how the bipartisan contributions of one committee of the Legislative Assembly can, in fact, work towards finding the solutions needed on the national agenda. Mr. Speaker, reform of public services related to immigration, labor, and employment can only be achieved with the commitment of a highly motivated, flexible, diverse, and skilled civil service workforce, capable of providing high-quality, personalized public services. Admittedly, I am encouraged by the positive change agent attitude taken by a significant portion of staff whom I have met thus far. This paradigm shift, Mr. Speaker, is an opportunity for us all to be excited, motivated, and reinvigorated, because we are certainly poised, Mr. Speaker, to support the modernization of public services to the direct benefit of Caymanians on a scale likely not to be seen before. Mr. Speaker, focusing our attention now to the Ministry of Community Affairs and its supporting agencies, and the role and the essential role and imperative role in identifying, addressing, and preventing social issues in our country. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Community Affairs has recently welcomed a new acting chief officer, whom I have every confidence in, and work has already begun to introduce meaningful reform. This is evidenced by the ministry's recently established purpose, which will guide both the ministry and its departments. This purpose is empower people, enhance lives. This overarching purpose will therefore guide the ministry's efforts to enhance operations and ensure services are more effective and efficient when carrying out its mandate to assist those in need and enhance the well-being of vulnerable persons. Mr. Speaker, the member from Newland said that he could not see in the budget how the government intends to assist our most vulnerable. Well, if you will allow me to repair that loss by providing some precise information, and it is unfortunate that he is not within these halls to hear it. Mr. Speaker, in support of the government's broad outcomes for 2018-2019 budget year, the Ministry of Community Affairs will endeavor to focus on the following key goals. First, strengthen child safeguarding services by focusing efforts on prevention and intervention. Mr. Speaker, with the establishment of the MASH, or Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub, the Ministry of Community Affairs, in conjunction with the Department of Children and Family Services, are committed to working with the Royal Cayman Islands Police, Education Department, and Health Services to enhance the safety of our children. In addition to upholding high social standards and carrying out effective investigations, the DCFS will focus on prevention and intervention with the support from their partner agencies. The ministry will continue to support the work of the Keys Foundation for the provision of residential services for children. Mr. Speaker, it is also imperative that we continue to assess, evaluate, and implement changes as necessary to our programs and services that are related to our children, as they are the future of our country. Equally as important, Mr. Speaker, enhancement to services cannot be accomplished without funding and adequate resources. With this in mind, the Ministry of Community Affairs will be conducting a series of evaluations to ensure services and programs for at-risk youth and children in need of care and protection are being provided at the standard required and making strategic improvements where necessary. 2, provide quality services to older persons and support their rights and unique needs in accordance with newly passed legislation and policy. Mr. Speaker, the work started under the previous administration to protect our most vulnerable is being continued by this new administration. The Older Persons Law, which was approved in March 2017 and commenced in July 2017, with the establishment of the Council of Older Persons, which is to advise on older persons' issues and welfare and advocating for enhancing the quality of life of older persons across these 3 islands. I'm also delighted, Mr. Speaker, to see my constituent and friend, Ms. Lucille Seymour, recently appointed as chairman of this council. I know she will do a good job. But, Mr. Speaker, we have a responsibility to not only establish and implement legislation and procedures, but also to enforce them. As often, we are the voice for older persons, children, and persons with disabilities. This is why, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Community Affairs and the DCFS will continue to review and enhance its residential and community-based services for older persons, both in Grand Cayman and in Cayman Brac. For 2018, Mr. Speaker, the ministry will support a new public-private sector initiative, Adopt a Home program. Also, our annual Older Persons Month in October of each year will continue to be organized and facilitated by the ministry and DCFS. However, initiatives will be developed to support ongoing activities throughout the year to keep our older persons active and involved, extend appreciation to them for more than only 1 month, and establish relationships and activities between our elderly and our young children, which research shows is educational and beneficial to both the old and the young. In addition to the services provided by the Department of Children and Family Services, the ministry will continue to provide support and funding to the Pines Retirement Home for their invaluable service that they continue to provide to our older persons. 3, support and empower families in need through the provision of human services. Due to the numerous social issues that we are now facing as a country, assistance in various forms is necessary, be it temporary or permanent financial assistance, intervention, or empowerment towards independence and self-sufficiency. Mr. Speaker, work has already begun to reorganize and enhance the services provided by the NAU. As such, it is important that we allow some time to pass in order to see this work come to fruition. As they say, Rome was not built in a day, Mr. Speaker, and these problems did not develop over the course of a day, but certainly a much longer period. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to report that the permanent financial assistance backlog has now been reduced from 311 applications to 42. And efforts are being made to ensure that these circumstances are not repeated. Necessary steps are also being taken to conduct reassessments in a timely manner to best address changing circumstances. I'm also very pleased, Mr. Speaker, that we are able to increase the support that is extended to our seamen and veterans who played a critical role in the development of our country. This will result in an increase from $550 per month to $650 per month in 2018, and then increase a further $100 to $750 per month in 2019. The increase is also applicable to persons receiving personal financial assistance. In addition to services provided by the DCFS and the NAU, Mr. Speaker, the Meals on Wheels program expanded its services to numerous families and older persons in our community. Again, this is an example of the importance of partisanship and positive working relationships within our community. Efforts will be made by the ministry to continue to support this important cause. Mr. Speaker, apart from monetary support and provision of basic supplies to families, we are fortunate to be able to contribute to a vital service provided by the Cayman Islands Crisis Center, which provides and promotes safety and empowerment to numerous children, women, and families. Again, I believe the member from Newlands made a reference that not enough is being done in this direction, Mr. Speaker, but I humbly submit just the opposite. As a result, we continue to extend our appreciation and support as much as possible to this agency for the essential services in which they provide. Also, Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank the DCFS, the NCVOs, Nadine Andreas Residential Foster Home, and the numerous foster parents for their contributions to the community and interventions they provide in the best interest of our children and families. 4, we will review policies and advocate for gender equality through gender mainstreaming. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Community Affairs will continue to advocate for services and support legislation towards gender equality and mainstreaming. Mr. Speaker, we have some fantastic programs which really are making a difference. And whilst not attached to the ministry for which I am responsible, I commend the Ministry of Education on its strategic partnership with 100 Women in Finance, which produced Girl Force 100, which has taken 75 young Caymanian girls between the ages of 13 and 18 years old from each of the John Gray High Schools, Clifton Hunter High Schools, and SciFec, and not only exposed them to a spectrum of new careers, which these young women probably never would have known existed, but is also teaching them, one by one, Mr. Speaker, to have the confidence and skills to be self-sufficient and succeed in this world. My understanding is that there are plans to expand the program to include Layman E. Scott High School in Cayman Brac in 2018, and I applaud these efforts, Mr. Speaker. 5, restructure organizational resources in a strategic way to ensure services are efficient and effective. Mr. Speaker, efforts are already underway for ministry and departmental resources and services to be strategically aligned and restructured. Staffing will be utilized creatively to enhance services and meet the needs of the clientele in a timely, effective, and efficient manner. To ensure consistency, best use of resources, and promote staff development effective the 1st of November 2017, human resource staff have been redeployed to the ministry, allowing for the HR to be centralized, Mr. Speaker. This means that the HR team now consists of 4 staff who will review existing practice as necessary, provide human resource support and guidance to the ministry and relevant departments, whilst promoting staff development and the ever so important succession planning. Mindful that the budget does not allow for the entire restructuring process to all occur at once, Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to inform this honorable House and members and the public that a recruitment process is now underway to provide the NAU with the support it needs and will be completed before the end of this calendar year. In addition, Mr. Speaker, a recently revised organizational chart allows the DCFS to move towards having specialized teams that can specifically focus on key clientele. In support of this process, Mr. Speaker, job descriptions will be reevaluated to ensure role clarity and best fit, with intentions to implement this process for the 2018 budget year. 6, establish a holistic and collaborative approach to services by working across the public and private sector. Mr. Speaker, it is important for us to acknowledge that no one ministry or agency alone can truly address the social issues and concerns in our country, nor meet the needs of persons and families. However, through a holistic approach and with the commitment of the public and private sector, I believe we will be able to accomplish more and see many more solutions. 7, further revise and develop services in the sister islands. Mr. Speaker, although services to our sister islands are on a smaller scale than they are in Grand Cayman, I am pleased that both the NAU and DCFS provide full-time services in Cayman Brac and, as necessary, to Little Cayman. Residential and community-based services are also provided to our older persons. However, in an effort to continue to advance our services, ongoing reviews and monitoring will be conducted to ensure the timely development of services based on need and demand identified in our sister islands. Mr. Speaker, you will also note that there is much work and plans in place by the Ministry of Community Affairs that will begin in 2018 and be carried forward depending on available funding and resources. Thank you, Councillor. All efforts will be made to progress in a strategic manner, Mr. Speaker, in order to enhance the services and be in a better position to prepare for future budget processes. I hope this information serves to enlighten the member from Newlands as to his question in terms of he wishes more was being done in community affairs, as well as enlightens the public to the significant work that has already gone in to these essential areas. And I remind him and them, it has only been 5 months. Mr. Speaker, along with the establishment of the National Human Resources Department, which will encompass the administration of work permits, permanent residency, and Caymanian status, combined with the reorganization of the various social welfare programs, the government has also been mindful to implement a strategic vision for enhanced border security and immigration. Mr. Speaker, as you are well aware, the Cayman Islands is a jurisdiction that is critically dependent on the capacity of border control authorities to facilitate the efficient movement of legitimate passengers via the airports and seaports. In light of this fact, Mr. Speaker, the government intends to ensure that border control authorities maintain the capability necessary to detect illegitimate, prohibited, and otherwise potentially dangerous or high-risk travelers who attempt to traverse the Cayman Islands borders. In our view, Mr. Speaker, it is not merely desirable to strategically bolster our border security framework, but rather critical to do so as a means of protecting our economic pillars and the country's reputation as a safe, secure, and attractive jurisdiction for residency, recreation, and business. In recent years, Mr. Speaker, the Cayman Islands have facilitated significant volumes of passengers arriving and departing the jurisdiction, both by air and sea. Between January and September of this year, the Cayman Islands has received 110,000 air arrival passengers, and I expect those totals for this year will ultimately exceed last year's total, which was 385,451, if I am correct. As evidenced by the ongoing expansion of the Owen Roberts International Airport, supported by the earlier comments made by the Honorable Minister of Tourism, the government is of the view that strong growth in passenger traffic will be sustained for the foreseeable future. Managing growth in passenger traffic will require not only airport and seaport infrastructure, but also strategic border security policy by which to facilitate modern collaborative approaches driven by intelligence sharing and risk management. In our view, Mr. Speaker, the Cayman Islands border is a national asset, holding national security, economic, and strategic value. Advancing the way in which we manage the border, therefore, aims for the seamless movement of legitimate passengers in and out of the Cayman Islands as a means of supporting trade, travel, and migration. Mr. Speaker, it is important to realize that the operating environment for our border control authorities is increasingly complex, with significant risks associated with many aspects of the business. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, the government has taken various steps to strengthen relationships within our international partners in the arenas of border control, national security, law enforcement, and intelligence, which will allow our border security authorities to better manage this national asset we call a border, and to ensure a comprehensive approach to border security. Mr. Speaker, we can all appreciate that the world is undergoing security transformations, the scale, scope, and complexity of which are unlike anything humanity has undergone before. In tandem, technologies, intelligence sharing, Risk assessment techniques have and will continue to revolutionize our approaches to border security. This new global landscape has different and significant implications for the movement of people across all borders, including our own. Consequently, this government will continue to create policies that will enable border control authorities to achieve effective solutions in collaborations with trusted partners at the local, regional, and international levels. Our goal, Mr. Speaker, for strengthening border security most certainly built upon successful initiatives and seek to sustain the balance between facilitating legitimate travel while detecting and preventing the movement of illegitimate travelers and illicit goods into our territory and across our borders. It is pleasing, therefore, to recognize some of the key steps to date in this regard, including 1, participation in the development of the CARICOM counterterrorism regional strategy. 2, completion of a border security risk assessment in partnership with the UK Border Force. 3, partnership with the US Customs Border Protection Agency, which will provide the convenience of pre-clearance into Miami Airport for passengers traveling directly from Miami to Grand Cayman. 4, the introduction of red and green channels for customs declarations, with plans to further modernize that strategy to manage risk and create a more efficient passenger flow. 5, the introduction of online customs declarations for importers and traders. 6, state-of-the-art container scanning technologies to manage risk in relation to imports and exports. And 7, use of advanced passenger information or API data, which eliminated the need to conduct immigration inspections of passengers departing the Cayman Islands. Mr. Speaker, I just made mention of our advances in cargo security. However, consider, if you will, that cargo is only as secure as the ship or plane and crew that carries it. A key element of the government's border security policy involves modernizing our advanced passenger information system. Advanced passenger information, or API, involves the capture of a passenger's biographic data and other details by the carrier prior to the departure, and the transmission of those details by electronic means to the border control authorities in the destination country. For this reason, Mr. Speaker, API has the potential to considerably reduce inconvenience and delay experienced either as a result of processing to facilitate travel, imports, or exports. While it may not be fully appreciated, it is because of our existing API system that passengers departing Cayman do not need to be inspected by immigration officials. Our goal here, Mr. Speaker, is to sophisticatedly manage risks relative to border security and passenger facilitation with respect to arrivals as well as departures, creating increased conveniences and safety to the benefit of Caymanians, residents, and visitors alike. Ultimately, Mr. Speaker, given that Cayman is not immune from the threat landscape of crime and terrorism, we are committed to building capacity and capability to ensure that passengers and crew manifests of carriers will be cross-checked against local, regional, and international watch lists and intelligence databases. As a result, Mr. Speaker, we will continue to enhance the toolkit for identifying travelers who pose security threats to our islands. The modernization of our API system, Mr. Speaker, will help support the goal of modernizing our overall border security framework to complement anticipated growth in passenger volumes, manage inherent security risks, and improve the experience for all travelers. In order to effectively meet the dual objectives of facilitating access of eligible travelers while mitigating security concerns, we intend to ensure that modern facilities, technologies, and systems complement skills, training, and competencies to enable border security targeting that will identify travelers that present the highest risk. automated border control or ABC solutions, including e-gates or kiosks, are systems that can facilitate this risk-based approach to border security. Mr. Speaker, it is also pleasing to convey that as a result of the enhancements with APIS, we will be positioned to implement strategic value-added border control solutions, such as automated kiosks and e-gates, which will facilitate efficiencies in the processing of passengers throughout our airport. The protection and security of our border, Mr. Speaker, is not merely an operation conducted at airports, our seaports, and the interior, but also includes the maritime front. In fact, the Cayman Islands is intrinsically connected to and immensely reliant on the oceans. Mr. Speaker, you will appreciate, however, that the maritime domain presents a unique set of challenges as well that have impacted the Joint Marine Unit. Challenges that will likely also be encountered by a Coast Guard service. These challenges are being tackled by countries all over the world, so we are not unique. However, despite being surrounded by the ocean, we may not view it as an interconnected framework of legal structures with diverse uses and, frankly, Mr. Speaker, unfettered access. Now, when I say legal structures, Mr. Speaker, I mean established concepts like the rights of innocent passage, access to ports, force majeure, and so forth. As it relates to diverse uses, there are factors including trade and natural resources, transportation, and recreation. With regard to unfettered access, Mr. Speaker, I am referring to the fact that while we may be bounded by our oceans, we're actually not protected by them. In fact, the oceans presents the most challenging operating environment, especially in the context of border security, law enforcement, and search and rescue. As part of the government's commitment to holistically enhancing border security, it is pleasing to note, Mr. Speaker, that a strategic maritime security management committee, chaired by the chief officer responsible for the immigration ministry, will be established to oversee the evolution of the Joint Marine Unit into a national Coast Guard service. We recognize the significant challenges involved in transitioning from a Marine unit to a Coast Guard, and as such, expect that the committee will provide the higher level strategic direction necessary to ensure effective and cost-efficient maritime security. Mr. Speaker, the transition to a Coast Guard service will undoubtedly entail a significant management process spanning, among other aspects, legislation and policy, organizational standards, structures, operations, procurement, recruitment, and training. The process of planning through to executing will therefore entail a collaborative effort among local leaders with support from expertise sourced through the United Kingdom Maritime and Coast Guard Agency. Ultimately, Mr. Speaker, the establishment of a National Coast Guard Service signals our intention to take a holistic approach to enhancing and sustainably supporting border security. While the fine details are yet to be determined, it is envisioned that the Coast Guard Service will exercise authorities and deploy capability to significantly enhance the safety and security of Cayman's maritime domain, and in doing so, will enforce Cayman's various maritime laws and regulations, as well as international treaties and regional agreements, guard our coastlines, waterways, and ports, perform vital life-saving and disaster response missions, including search and rescue operations, and defend against security threats, including terrorism, illegal migration, and criminal enterprise actors involved in smuggling of people, weapons, drugs, and illicit goods. Mr. Speaker, it is clear to see that border security is a complex, layered, yet integrated and cross-functional aspect of national security, which this government is not prepared to sacrifice. Instead, we intend to ensure that the public will continue to enjoy the virtues of security and public safety, as well as travel and trade. The government also intends to work towards the eventual implementation of a coastal defense and surveillance radar system to bolster our intelligence and operational capability. This layer of security framework, Mr. Speaker, will improve vessel tracking, maritime anomaly detection, enhance maritime interception operations, and provide increased security in the protection of our coastlines, waterways, transportation hubs, and critical infrastructure points. As a strategic measure, our goal here is to provide our border security authorities with a shore-based maritime monitoring system that will deliver situational awareness, functionality required to mitigate the movement of drugs, guns, and other threats to public safety. Finally, Mr. Speaker, in relation to security and public safety, it is pleasing to note that the government has also sustained its support to the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service. As I mentioned earlier, this includes funding for an additional 75 officers specifically tasked to focus on community policing. I am pleased to see the return of a former chief inspector to head that unit, and we are already seeing vast improvements and accomplishments under his stellar leadership, and I might add, he is a Caymanian. Additionally, consistent with the government's efforts to provide solutions that increase the security and safety of persons living, working, and conducting business in these islands, we have also provided funding for increased tactical resources and infrastructure. Now, Mr. Speaker, it is my hope that one day we will return to a time where these resources are no longer needed. However, until that time comes, the government takes very seriously its responsibility to properly equip our security services in order to keep our citizens safe. And I would hope all and sundry within these hallowed halls would agree with this approach. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I congratulate and thank all the members of this government and the hardworking civil service for the preparation of this budget, of which I believe the country may feel encouraged that the future for all of us remains bright. On a personal note, I thank the government for receiving me into its numbers and giving me an opportunity to serve in a meaningful capacity, first, the constituents of Prospect and the wider interest and citizens of the Cayman Islands, for which I continue to pledge myself to their service and to do the best that I can. This concludes my contribution to this 2018-2019 budget, and I thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, for your time.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? The Honorable Minister of Health.
Good afternoon, Madam Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sorry. Still back 4 years ago. Forgive me. Thank you for this opportunity to make my contribution in the debate of the budget and through speeches. I am humbled and honored to do so on behalf of the people of Bordentown East. In our representation form of government, we are merely the mouthpieces of our constituents. Sometimes I think some of us forget that. Let me first acknowledge Almighty God, without whose blessings we would not even be here. Even with the cut and thrust of the adversarial Westminster form of politics, we must first acknowledge that these Cayman Islands, whom we are all elected to represent, is still one of the best and most blessed places on the face of the earth. Do we have problems? Yes, of course. But our blessings far outweigh them. Mr. Speaker, I'm humble to be able to make this contribution today. And I am wearing two hats. First and foremost, as the MLA for Bordentown East, and secondly, as Minister in the Cabinet of the Coalition for National Unity, with the portfolio responsible for health, environment, culture, and housing. Mr. Speaker, I'll begin my contribution by talking about the key initiatives to improve the quality of lives of people in Bordentown East. And some might have taken a different approach. I think that we must always remember what came first. You can only become a minister, Mr. Speaker, if you become an MLA. And I, for one, I will stay grounded. And that fact, true to my conviction, to offer the best and possible representation for Bordentown East. Mr. Speaker, first, I want to say that we have some exciting plans for the continued development of Cowood Beach. We're going to construct a proper dock and pier to enhance the boating and sporting functionality of this area. This will augment the launching ramp and is a logical next step in the development of this facility. I will be announcing the exact details of this in the near future, but the plans have already started. Mr. Speaker, the current Cowood Beach has evolved into a more mature and adult-centered place to hang out. I am therefore pleased to announce that the government of which I am a part of have now required hundreds of feet of additional beach just west of the additional beach, the existing beach. The additional beach will be family-themed and more kid-friendly than the existing beach. I will work diligently to get kid-friendly equipment and amenities installed to ensure that it winds up being the preeminent place for children's parties, family picnics, and community socials that are themed towards the family. Mr. Speaker, this will not just serve Bordentown East, but families and children from all over Bordentown. Mr. Speaker, mentioned Bordentown Primary School. There are many exciting things happening in our schools. Despite all that we hear being discussed, we have to be hopeful, Mr. Speaker. And this will be elaborated on more by the Minister of Education. However, as we know, government is not the be-all and end-all in a community. To this end, I am working diligently with the PTA of Bordentown Primary School to provide playground equipment. I received a letter some 2 months ago and searched and sought sponsorship, and I've raised more than 70% of the funds needed for Bordentown schools playground equipment. I must say they are very elated about this. Me and my colleague, Bordentown West member, has taken Bordentown Primary School as one of our projects, as that is my alma mater, in addition to Clifton Hunter High School. I will continue to work closely with these two schools and also in assistance with Savannah Primary to see that they get the needed things and don't have the same concerns that they had in the past years about books and pencils and all the other stuff. I'll work closely with all the other representatives from the Bordentown area, Bordentown West, Savannah, and Newlands, to ensure that we are responsible enough and not just waiting for government to be all. Mr. Speaker, I have long believed that schools must serve a critical purpose to the communities, even after 3 p.m., when the school days officially ends. To this end, I will be working with the PTA and the principal to enhance the provision of quality after-school programs and care, which are being created right now. And we already found funding for it. In a world where parents are increasingly busy with the demands of work and the extended family homestead approach to living is practically non-existent, it is critical to provide a safe place for increasing numbers of children to be until their parents get home from work. The more homework, crafts, sports, science, and reading clubs we can provide after school closes, the better off we will be. My dream is to have a vibrant school community which keeps children safe and out of trouble and also enhances their learning. With the assistance and direction of the PTA and the principal, I am confident we can enhance the offerings at the Bordentown Primary School. For clarity, Mr. Speaker, I am referring to programs to augment the offering of the school and not another source of stress for the principals and their teachers. Mr. Speaker, the Hague-Borden Stadium, we will continue to see enhancements of this facility. There will be critical upgrades, including new changing rooms, restrooms, seated stands. Also noticed just over the weekend that we will need additional deep wells and basketball hoops have already been ordered. Mr. Speaker, sports in Bordentown is alive and well. I am proud that Bordentown East serves as home field for our beloved Bordentown Football Club, which I serve as vice president. Once upon a time. Mr. Speaker, we have the beautiful Mega Bay Pond up there just sitting down, waiting for something to enhance it. We want to move around this district and enhance the community. It will be a delight for residents and visitors alike to enact this Mega Bay boardwalk that has already been designed, and what a joy and beauty this will be for those bird watchers, etc., for families and vendors, especially with the new bust-in tourists to the White House that come up there daily, hundreds of people. We can benefit from this and create some more entrepreneurs in Bordentown. Mr. Speaker, the Bordentown Clinic, that is really one of my projects. and something that I campaigned on in terms of trying to expand the services of this growing community. Not only is Bordentown East the largest district, but also the largest growing district, with more people coming in every month. Mr. Speaker, I am actively working with the senior management team at the HSA to ensure that the offering of specialty and doctor visits in this line with the demands of the community, and to increase the hours rather than persons making a mad rush dash to get home at 6 o'clock through 5 o'clock traffic and not getting up there until 5 minutes to 6. So, Mr. Speaker, to this end, we will be conducting a new assessment of all district clinics to ensure that we are meeting the health needs of the islands effectively. I will be instructing the ministry team to work closely with the board and the management at the HSA to work on this critical initiative. To that, Mr. Speaker, I think it is only fair, because of the size of Bordentown East, to revive the old emergency site on Anton Borden and maximize our efforts for the largest district in Cayman and fastest growing. Just had a meeting last week with the Lookout community, and they're excited about it. I'm also looking very closely at the ambulance services to ensure we have adequate coverage for the eastern districts. This has long been a vexing issue that has plagued us. Mr. Speaker, it would be very selfish of me if I didn't mention that I went out just over the weekend during the rainfall, the heavy rainfall that we haven't seen for many years, and drove from end to end of Bordentown East trying to investigate where the more problematic flooding areas were. Mr. Speaker, Bordentown has had a long history of flooding, mainly in the areas of Monument Road, Cumber Avenue, Belford, Kipling, areas in Midland Acres. To that end, I came right to my team, to the government, to our caucus, and said, I need your help. And they were right there for me. One of the many reasons why I am happy to be a part of this team. And they have promised their support. One of the things that I have suggested to them, Mr. Speaker, is because our problem is so vast up there that we should consider purchasing a pump or a pump truck just for Bordentown East. It's that serious. However, another consideration is to assist persons to gain access to their homes by giving them material in the much needed areas, much flooded areas, to ensure that the persons, because when I went there, I had to actually use my vehicle and drop people to their homes because the water was so deep they could not walk in it, Mr. Speaker. So this is a very serious situation. And some of the persons showed me this. I walked to the back of their homes and so forth, trying to assess what the problem is, and we could assist them and alleviate some of the flooding if the NRA went there and tried to help them with some material. in the low-lying areas. So one of the other considerations spoke to the NRA about, and we will do a tour shortly, is additional drains. And now been made aware that you can actually drill 50 feet deeper. So to re-drill some of those to give us better coverage. Mr. Speaker, these are not new problems. These have been existing. I'm trying to do the best that I can, the support of the government, to tackle this problem. Some suggest all kinds of stuff that can work, pumping stations and culverts and all kinds of stuff. But these things cost. And I will ask the NRA to do a comprehensive plan and get back to us with the costing. Because every day there's a new development, and I do agree that because of the development around the area, that it has caused the natural flow of water to not go where it used to go in the ponds and so forth. So, and this is what development causes, the good and the bad. Mr. Speaker, I noticed in this honorable house that we are still printing and ordering books and binders. And I'm in the opinion that we need to invest in some iPads, some laptops, to alleviate this problem, to save the government thousands of dollars. Also, Mr. Speaker, I know that may be painful for some.
It is.
But we have to start somewhere. Mr. Speaker, I want to provoke the past and showing how it has met the future. It was only in 2007 you, Mr. Speaker, reached out to me privately, I must add, as a capable Boddentowner that could contest and win the general election in 2009. Based on your information received from Boddentowners all over. First, I refused. Secondly, I refused. Very few mothers or spouses want any of their loved ones entering politics. I eventually gave in. Mr. Speaker, I must say that the now Honorable Premier, this is where I talk about the past meeting the future. Yeah. The now Honorable Premier was looking and listening. And not only did he reach out to me, he didn't do it privately, he did it publicly. So that, I must say, Mr. Speaker, the current Premier trumped your effort.
That was several years different.
With his no fear in his party or the public knowing who he favored. I consider him a friend, and I thank you for reaching over for me to serve this country and my community. I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, Very few gave me a chance to win in May. Yes, this barefoot boy. Very few like me, Mr. Speaker, will ever make it here again. And I thank God, as only Him could have made this possible to overcome so many obstacles that I have. And Lord knows there were many. I am so proud to see how faith has brought my first employer, the member from Georgetown West, and my first supervisor, and my first co-worker, the member from Newlands. At 8 years old, thereabout, working at By Right, bagging. Oh, how life plays out. Small, small world. Mr. Speaker, I really didn't know how many people throughout this beautiful country, the hope that they have for me and the prayers that are sent up to protect me. People identify with me as one who understands their problems and has the empathy and humbleness to address them. Mr. Speaker, I want to mention that some Bordentown constituents have come to me about the sale of Crown land. Now, if you know Bordentowners, when you say the word land, that is a very serious thing. Land and sale all in the same sentence. It's a very serious thing. And they are not encouraged by any Crown land being sold. I kind of see where the government was going in terms of small parcels that the government couldn't do anything with. But there are some that just mean too much to them, and they just don't want to give it up. I can publicly say that I don't support the sale of the Crown land in Bordentown. Mr. Speaker, this budget is a significant one, as it represents the first two-year budget for the Cayman Islands and the first budget of the new government of the national unity. It is also my first budget as Minister of Health, Environment, Culture, and Housing. It's very unique, Mr. Speaker. I've been a minister twice and only had one budget. Very strange. I want to thank the Premier for his budget policy statement entitled Stability, Empathy, and Prosperity, a plan for sustainable social and economic development. I also want to thank the Minister for Finance and Economic Development for his hard work, as well as his budget address entitled An Inducement to Growth. I start by mentioning these two documents because of this government and for this budget. They not only represent our combined plans for the next 2 years, but also they indicate the basis on which these budgets were developed. Mr. Speaker, before I go on, I want to thank the Honorable Minister and former Premier from Cayman Brac. I don't know whether it's west or east, but it's It's east. Cayman Brac East. I'm corrected. I want to thank her for all the, I call it counseling and support that she has given me over the years until this day. And I want to publicly let her know that. Thank you, Minister. Mr. Speaker, I know.
Honorable Minister, if you intend to move on to a new area,
Yes.
there is a meeting that needs to be had, and we will take a suspension at this point and come back at the, hopefully by 20 past 4. 4:30, at which point we will have to take the motion for suspension of orders at that point. So we'll suspend the House until 4:30.